Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
So the word submit or submission is found around 30 times in the Bible across the Old and New Testament. Now, the majority of times, it is actually in reference to submitting to God or to submitting to a law. But the one you're probably familiar with is from Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. We get tripped up on that 5:22 part, right, where he says it to wives. But look at this passage, because this is where he starts and where he repeats throughout the book. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's this concept of mutual submission. It creates this dynamic in our relationship. Christ is at the top. So when I first submit to him, it makes it possible for me to do things I could not do on my own. Getting on one another's team will actually change your relationship. When we submit to one another, when we get on each other's team, our relationships are better.
Part 2 of Love Handles.
Yes, the second love handle.
Yes, you were, ever since I met you, you've been asking me if you can talk about this topic.
Yes, I think the first
So
Sunday I
excited.
ever visited, I was like, hey, if you ever want a woman to share about submission, please pick me.
Yep. So we just wanted to give that platform to you.
That's not actually, no, that's not. Why don't you, just for clarity.
Yeah, just for clarity. Yeah, that did not actually happen.
Nope.
But we've, over the years, we have sometimes talked through this verse specifically as it relates to relationships, romantic relationships, and mutual submission, that whole idea of mutual submission.
Yep. So that's the verse you're talking about is Ephesians 5.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So 21 starts the mutual submission part. We usually skip that and go right to the wives submit to your husband part.
Yep. And I think I have Ephesians 5:25-28 on my ring. Yep, it's engraved right there.
Because that's for you. That's when you start your 170 words.
Yeah, that's my, you got to die.
Yeah, you got to go all the way to the cross. And, and it's actually when I was, because I've read it several times this week, right? And it's like a lot. There's a lot of things guys have to do.
Yeah. And present without, blemish and all
you're
that kind of
responsible
stuff.
for a lot of things. You know, provision, safety, purity, like so many things. And we're like, just, submit to him.
Yep. But you talked about that S word. That is the second S word, and that is submit. And
so the first S word was soul.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Oh, and then we're going to talk about next week.
Oh, we shouldn't. We
don't
should
preview. Okay,
yeah, don't preview that.
All
yeah,
right.
A lot of S words in this series.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I thought you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
And I even think some of the questions in here show these are questions that you got from people that we're going to talk about.
Messages or just coming up to me right after the service.
Yeah, well, I saw multiple, women specifically who are coming up to you after service, and I know you had one that just said thank you. They'd never heard that unpacked the way it was.
Yeah, they said they'd had a lot of baggage with that. In their first marriage, there was a lot of using that as a reason. And actually, they said that a church, like a pastor, and people had come to them and said that using that particular passage as to why she should stay with him through infidelity and abuse. So she definitely she did not necessarily even want to be there. You know, she was like, when I realized what we were talking about, I did not even want to be in the room. But, tried to hang on. And that's a real thing for some people.
For sure. There's a lot of baggage, some trauma related to those kind of things. And I think, for some people, we're in this relationship series because we talked about it a little bit last week that the quality of our relationships so greatly impacts the quality of our lives. And God being a relational God, he wants us to have great relationships with him and with other people. And that's evident all throughout, scriptures. You can pull that idea. And so, going through this series, marriage being the most important relationship that many of us have in our lives, we're going, hey, let's have great marriage relationships. And if someone's not married, a lot of times dating and, being single eventually, most people eventually want to get there and they want to, find a partner for life. And so, what does that look like? And I think it was so significant that this topic was part 2 because, and I don't know if you did this on Sunday, the Jerry Maguire piece.
Oh,
did you ended up cutting that out? Okay. Yeah. Well, I just think like, why would we do this for part 2 of a series on having great,
Yeah.
And for me, it's that movie scene from Jerry Maguire, which I know you just hate.
I literally, when I say like, there's not a lot of things in life I think I can say. Like I loathe it. Like I think it's done more damage than it has good.
Yeah. And do you want to?
Tom Cruise.
Yeah. No, he's definitely listening to
this. It's really,
so.
And it's his fault. No, in my original notes, I was going to talk about just that Hollywood kind of sets us up to really have a warped perspective on not just the term submission, but just in love and relationships in general, right? And I was going to, talk about several lines from movies, but one is this line from Jerry Maguire when he comes back in and, he says, "You complete me." And it's a great moment because he's like woken up and he's like, I realize like what I'm about to walk away from, and this person, and if he had said, "You compliment me," which would not have been nearly as dramatic, but like that would have been a different thing.
Wouldn't have sold as many movies.
Because it's really big. And to be honest, what I think kind of gets me fired up about it a little bit is because it's been a lot of my life, I think, thinking that was what relationships was that, and even in a friendship needed to complete me, or my parents needed to be perfect, so they had to be a complete part of my story, but looking for a relationship with men because they would complete me. Mm-hmm. And when we enter any kind of relationship like that, and I always make the joke that it's actually technically that's called codependency and actually is a disorder that you should probably seek help about. But like, I'm not really joking at the same time, because like when we operate in our relationships, like we have to have them, we need them versus choosing them. One, we're outside of, I think, God's bounds because God designed everything for choice, right? Because even like Buck talked about that last week with the idea of restriction is part of what actually refreshes our soul.
Yeah, free will.
God's like, right out of the garden. Like, I just want to go ahead and say, hey, here's this tree. Let's just don't choose this one. Mm-hmm. I'm here with you, but let's don't choose it. And so like I'm giving you a choice. And so I just think he just kind of continues that in our relationship with him. And so marriage should be a choice, not I'm stuck with you, or I have to have you, or I need you.
Yep.
That's a long explanation for why I don't like one line.
No, but I think I wanted to start off that way before we got to the questions, because it's really significant as to why this would be number 2 in the series. Like, we kind of went sequentially on what's really important to talk about. And part 1, how's your soul? If your soul's not good, then, your relationships are not going to be good too. Part 2, though, is a big question about needs in my mind. And you didn't go into this, but it's that idea of you complete me. Like, I have needs and you complete all of my needs is the myth. Yeah. And I think that's how a lot of people operate. But in reality, there's no other human being that can complete all the needs that I have, ways in which I'm designed to be loved and known. Yep. And there's no other human being that can do that fully. Yep. You can do aspects of it. Yeah. And that's the big flaw. And that's why I think this is so significant to a part 2 of the series, is because it's mutual submission is recognizing this person can't meet all my needs. Yes. Jesus can meet all my needs. And this person is more of a teammate in life, using the terminology you talked about.
Yeah, I think that when I think about, how is it with your soul, you have to start there, because you can only work on you, really, but that's like your posture toward God. And then God says, okay, so now that we have this conversation about our posture, let's turn our posture toward our spouse and who we've decided to align ourselves with for life, in theory, right? So, like, I think that's so, and then I don't know what all's coming up next in the next few weeks, but like that will change, but like starting there, first I'm going to check myself with God, then I'm going to check myself with my spouse, and then I'm going to figure out how to apply some of this stuff.
Yep. And I Ashley and I get into arguments sometimes, or maybe she's upset about something that's going on in her world. It's our world, but it's her world. Mm-hmm. And, I want to do things to fix it sometimes. And it's the craziest thing.
So weird.
It's like.
Does it work?
No, it doesn't. But the thing I always love about her is sometimes she'll have a comment to go, I think I just need to like bring this to Jesus, or I just need to bring this to God. Like it's almost a recognition sometimes of like, no matter, she's like, honey, that's sweet, but you can't do anything about this. Yeah. Because, I got to submit this to Christ first. In her own way, she says that, and I always really, really respect it. And it's also a good reminder for me as a husband that I'm like, oh yeah, there's God is more important in her life than I am. Yeah.
So it's good for you to hear that she's checking in with an even bigger authority, right? Yep. Like, so, no, I love that. And then
she leaves for a community group, and I'm like so codependent. I'm just like, what do I do with all this time, So anyways.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
I feel like that's Sal too. Sal's like a quality time person.
Yep.
And so he would love to do everything together.
Yep.
And quality time is, I'm not at all.
I'm quality time 100%.
Oh, God.
Like last night, Valentine's Day, we just went to Sonic and just got Sonic drinks and just sat in the car for 30 minutes while my mom put Grayson down, and that was great. Yeah. And that was like awesome.
But I love that. It's not that I don't want to spend time with my husband. It's just that I don't want to spend as much time as he wants to spend.
That's fair.
But when he's like, let's go to the grocery store together, I'm like, let's do this sometimes.
That's awesome. Anyways,
All right.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start? I had a handful of comments and questions. So
yeah, so I think I'll just go through. Were there any of these that you wanted to hit first, or were key or anything?
No, they were all equally intimidating.
Yeah, awesome. So people obviously honing in on the submit side of the conversation, and a lot of what about questions. You can tell there's a question beneath the question in a lot of these, and that's just good to recognize. These are not emotionally neutral or coming from an emotionally neutral place. These are coming from history. But question number one, and I'll just ask you, and then we'll talk about it, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Does submitting mean I lose my individuality or permission to do the things that I enjoy?
Yeah, this was actually a question from a student, which I totally love that our students are sitting and hearing and thinking and already kind of walking in that direction of like trying to understand what they're hearing. Yeah. And my response is really just what I told her was, I actually almost think it's the opposite. Being a part of a good team should bring out the best in all players, right? Like everybody's playing at their best if you kind of stick it with the team analogy. But one of the things I was trying to communicate to her, and we'll see if I actually did that well, is like there's a difference in like oppression and submission. Like, so oppression is like, I'm going to ask you to dampen or hide or remove a part of yourself, right? Like, so you no longer are allowed to show up as your full self in our relationship. And so that would be, oppression. And that's a big range, right? All the way from like physical control to abuse to manipulation to, that's just a huge range. And that's not submission. And so I think that sometimes when we hear that word submission, we equate it with someone's going to oppress me and I'm going to lose my rights and I'm going to lose who I am and what I want. And so I think it's an important distinction to say that's not what that is at all. If you think of submitting more like, we're already standing together and I'm choosing to have a posture of service. I'm choosing to, and I know there's going to be a lot of triggers when I say this, but I'm choosing to bow down. I'm choosing to lay down my rights because I'm choosing it, not because you are forcing me. And so I think I understand that for some people that's such a fine line, especially because of what they've been through. But in my mind, a healthy team, and I just keep kind of coming back to like, you will be the best version of yourself. In fact, when I am struggling with Sal, and I'm like, I'm just going to, like in that particular situation that my small group was challenging me on, it was a parenting situation, and I wanted to handle the situation one way, and he wanted to handle it a very different way. Couldn't really be more different, really. And we were at odds about it, and it was not an easy conversation to have, because then when we get defensive for our own position, we start to kind of throw arrows and like jabs and stuff like that. But when I was like, okay, just it's yours. Now, at first I said it's yours, meaning like, well, have fun. You have fun parenting and by yourself, which is not submission either. That's punishment. That's passive aggressive. That's manipulative. That's a whole nother ball game too. But, when I finally was like, okay, when God finally dealt with me, he was like, no, just lay it down and leave it to him and tell him you trust him with it, which is hard. I'm scared to trust you with this. Like, I'm worried you're not going to parent the way I think we should be parenting. But I let it. What's funny is it's actually a better version of myself. Like, because I'm still being honest about everything I'm feeling and thinking. Submission doesn't mean you're quiet. That's another thing I think we do too. It doesn't mean I don't say my opinions. It means I actually am creating space which I can share my opinions, and then I can shelf them while someone else allows their space, to be taken up. So I don't think I said all that to her in a text message, but I was just like, no, I actually think it makes you a better version of yourself. Yeah. Because you are making a conscious choice to step back and give someone else space. Yeah.
And I'd say too, I think this is a good topic to add both a woman's perspective and a man's perspective, because one, it's pretty like volatile when you start to get into what does it look like, but it's submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And so my takeaway from your message was, how can I submit myself to Ashley in a more regular way to elevate her? And then a lot of times for me, the call for a husband is, like you talked about, 170 words, very different. But for me, it's like when I come home and I'm about to walk through the garage door, I have I'm tired. I'm like hungry. I'm like, I just want to change out of work clothes and put some sweatpants on. Like I have all these things. But one of the big questions for me that I've been thinking through, and I heard this from another guy recently, is how can I bring more value to her right now than she brings to me in my life?
Yeah.
And
if you're both asking each other, asking yourselves that question, like how perfect will that be?
Yeah. And I can only ask that question when I'm already secure in my individuality and my own security.
Yeah,
to go point. God, you've met all my needs. I'm tired. I don't need to put those on her.
Yeah.
But let me just give me the strength to just bring value to her life right now. And I'm far from perfect at it, but that's my grid. What I took away from your message is just I've been thinking through the idea of just bringing value to other people.
Yeah. And I love that's such a tangible example. I just did some premarital counseling Saturday morning, and the couple was this. I swear this comes up every time I do premarital counseling with a couple, and it's this issue of, well, when I'm tired and he comes home and expects this, or I've been doing this all day, and then he just makes this comment like I'm not doing any and so I had one couple, he would want to come home and he would want to check out because he'd been working all day, so he'd want to check out for an hour. He'd go into the bathroom. I don't know how guys stay in the bathroom as long as they do. It's an interesting thing.
Why'd you look at me?
Why do all men seem to spend way more time in the bathroom than women? But anyway, I have theories, but it doesn't matter.
That's a different podcast.
That's a whole different podcast. Yeah. But she wanted him to come home and take over, right? So just trying to help them say, but if we're submitting to one another, you're going to look at him and you're going to say, I want you to be able to breathe for a second. Take 15, 20 minutes in the bathroom or whatever.
Yep.
Go change. Kind of decompress, and he's saying yes, but I want you to know that I'm showing up for you when I get home. Mm-hmm. And so it isn't an either or, which is what that question kind of gets to the root of. Is what about me? What about me? And not in a selfish way, and also a protective way, because but if we're both doing it, it just works so beautifully.
Yep. Yeah, that makes in terms of coming home, that whole staying in that example. One of the things about our schedule that has worked really well, and it's weird, we're right in the middle of adjusting it. And Ashley told me last night, just adjust it and then tell me what you want to do. But I come to work super early, 6, 7 a.m. and then I end up leaving between around 3-ish to go on a run before I come home, because runs energize me, and so I can walk in the But in my mind, I always think, and I know that's probably one of the hardest parts of the day for her, to be at home with a toddler alone, is that afternoon witching hour kind of thing. And so, but so let me come home with the best energy I have. And then she's going, but let me allow him to go get that run in, because that's something that fills up his cup.
Yeah.
And so it's it feels like when that works, not saying it always does, but when that works, it's this mutual submission thing of we're trying to provide value to the other person that I just think it's what about this? Let me think about this. When it comes to, because as I was talking, I was thinking about a question. Every family dynamic is different. Every marriage dynamic is different. Would you say submission looks different per couple?
I don't want to give a short yes to that, just in my opinion, because I think that people will run with that then, in a sense if I were to give my short yes, I'd be I'll do it my way. I think that there are some things that are probably, I think, common threads or bigger buckets that are more universal. And then I think there are some things that are specific couples, and then there are some things that are specific couples in specific seasons.
Right.
Because one of the things I was thinking as you were sharing was oh, I remember that season. And but it won't always be like that. And I do think couples get stuck in a rut and life happens. And then when God is trying to shift a season in your life, we can be resistant to that. Even just thinking of my own particular season about to be empty nesters, and my kids are about to be gone, and I'm thinking God we were fighting so much about this parenting issue. I almost wonder if that was the point. God had to kind of work through this tension with us, because we're about to step into being a whole different kind of couple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so each honoring seasons, and then honoring our unique. I don't want to give a blanket submission looks different for everybody, YOLO kind of thing. I'm no. I don't.
I think the reason I was asking, because I was thinking, Ash and I's dynamic is, she's stay-at-home mom full-time, and I'm full-time work, and that's more rare today than it used to be. And in my experience, in my circles of people that I talk to and bump into. And so for us, that idea looks different than if she was working full-time, I'm working full-time, we're trying to, she is working full-time. I just want to clarify.
But
she is working vocationally.
People are going to be commenting on this.
I know.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great I think it's a great point. So going back to that team analogy, it's almost like, well, you might be part of a different sport, but that sport all kind of has a similar vein, right? And then some things are just all athletes do this, right? Or all teams have to, you know, good leadership is important for any sport. Being athletic and practicing and conditioning is good for any sport. But I'm going to practice soccer differently than I'm going to practice basketball.
Right.
And so, and I'm going to have an off season and an on season differently. So I think, I think the logistics will look different. And there are so many great tips and tools and tricks. There's no way to cover all of them. Like what you were talking about, like I might go run for a run in the afternoon. That sounds terrible to me. I have zero desire to run anywhere at any point. I feel like it's very contrary to how we're designed.
Yeah.
Again, nothing's chasing you. No need to run. But anyway, there are other things I need to do, right? Yeah. And so I think that the logistics might look different, but the principle is universal. Does that maybe?
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
You know?
I think that's helpful to know. And maybe it goes back to the why. You know, you just got to have that really solid why to help figure out what the outcomes are for you and your relationship dynamic.
Yeah.
Like if the why is how can I leverage me for them?
Yes.
And how can I one another them in a way?
Yeah.
Then the outcomes, that'll lead me to the right outcomes for our relationship dynamic.
Yep.
You know, it'll be the same for someone else and it'll just be different outcomes probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that just starting each day, and this is like going to sound so cheesy, but man, if we could do it, like starting each day with, you know, what, and we ask this question here, what does love require of me today? And I think part of the reason we struggle to start with that question is because we're worried, you know, what if they're not asking it? Or, well, what if love requires me to do something I don't want? Or, you know, that's not fair, and what about what I get for love? And I think those are fair questions to come after.
Yeah.
I think that's why Paul starts with submit to one another. And then he goes into a little more of so wives, here's what that's going to look like. And, you know, historically, or even, I don't know, I don't want to get into but you know, the first thing he tells women is to submit your body, right? Like that's the first. And when you think about the jokes and the stereotypes, isn't that interesting? Right? Like that I've got a headache every night kind of thing. You know, we're not going to get too into details here, but that's another Sunday we're covering.
Yeah.
You know? But anyway.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe not. Who knows?
I'm so mysterious like that.
Yeah. They have no idea.
No clue what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So next question. We might have already covered it a little bit already, but where is the line between submitting and abuse/oppression/neglect of self?
Okay. Yeah. I think. Yeah, I mean,
is there anything else you'd add?
Well, I would. Yeah, I think it's so important to say like safety. You need to be safe. You need to be physically safe. You and your children need to be physically safe. That is not the kind of stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Every time I tell myself, like, people don't say things anymore, like pastors don't tell women to stay in abusive relationships because it's what the Bible says. Someone comes up to me and says someone said that to them. So so I do think. As much as I don't want to think those statements are kind of being made anymore, they still are in certain circles, or maybe we've grown up with some of that language or that baggage. And I do think the only thing we didn't say in that first part, you know, as far as like we talked a little bit about oppression versus submission, but really, yeah, there can be a clear line when you are physically in danger, you know, and then there are lines with emotional abuse as well, and control and different things. You can't control someone else submitting to you. So like a lot of what we talked about, like you and Ashley are both trying to figure out how can we be the best versions of ourselves and leverage each other for each other. But that's just not everybody's story. So some people, it may have started like that, or maybe it didn't. And we just ended up in a situation, and we're trying now to submit to Christ, but that other person is not interested in that journey. And that makes things tricky and difficult. So I do think having good conversations around what are roadmaps for those dynamics? You know, hey, trust has been broken, or hey, I'm in this situation. There are counselors and pastors and people that can guide you through trying different roadmaps to get out of that situation in the way that would benefit both of you first. But there are points in time in which I think, you know, and I think they're fewer than we like to think culturally.
Yeah.
Like I think more can be salvaged than we want to talk about, and it's just easier to get out sometimes.
Yeah.
But you know, I do still think, like, I would never want anyone to hear that submission means you stay in an abusive relationship. And that's not what God says at all.
Yeah, yeah.
For my interpretation.
Yeah, what would you say to someone, this is not one of the questions.
Oh, good, throw one at me.
Yeah, what would you say to someone who finds themselves in the dynamic which they are hearing us talk about submission, and they see the value, and they see how it can work when both people are doing it, but they know that their partner, their spouse, is not going to?
Yeah,
and maybe it's not abusive, maybe, but it's just what do you
just
what
kind
do
of
they
the
do?
more run of the mill, like and I think the last question someone asked me was basically, and this one I feel like I've gotten throughout the years in ministry often, which is essentially the question boils down to, when can I get a divorce? That's really what they're asking. They're coming and they're saying, when is enough enough? When do I get to draw a line? When do they get punished for how they are treating me, whether it's light punishment or like I want out, kind of like sever the relationship. And so I have kind of some standard rules of thumb. I think, I usually tell people, you are accountable for you. So when you can like imagine yourself, and if you're a Christian, this is what I would say to you. I would say, when you can stand before God and you can say, I've done everything I can to save, salvage, or make our marriage healthier. I've done all that I can. Now, 9 times out of 10, we don't say that. We are frustrated way before we get there. Or, if you have children, I've done you'll be able to look at them as adult children and say, I've done everything I can, or I did everything I could. If you don't consider yourself a Christian, I'm like, you still have the same philosophy, like looking in a mirror, like you're going to have to you're giving account to yourself. So like when you can look and say, I've done all that I can. So if someone says like, what do I do? I'm in the situation. He's neglecting my emotional needs, or he's checked out, or she refuses to have conversations around her spending. And I'm just using just kind of everyday examples that I think come up often. Or she doesn't, she's always nagging me, or she's punishing me for having to deal with the kids all the time. But these are just like, I'm like, okay, so have you done all the things you can do? And then we make a roadmap. And that would look a little different for everybody. Like, we can make like a 6-month plan. Okay, so what does it look like for you to work? It's actually exactly what this whole series is. Okay, so let's start with your soul. What are you doing for you? Like, not self-care. I'm talking about like for your growth and your maturity, not just like take stuff off your plate. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like
self-awareness.
Yeah. How full well do you know you? Do you know how you're showing up? Do you know how you're contributing?
What baggage you've brought in?
Yeah. Have you processed stuff that you're punishing him for that he didn't even know, right?
Yeah.
Have you held on to stuff? Are you grieving? And you've not processed your grief, and that's coming out in your marriage in all sorts of ways. So, you start with you. How is it with your soul? And then you start with like, well, how must it feel to be on the other side of you? Like, how is he experiencing you? How is she experiencing you? I've had men say, I told her I loved her. And it's like, or I haven't cheated on her. I had one man look at me once and say, well, I haven't cheated on her. Isn't that enough? And I'm like, well, no, that's awesome, because so many people have, so that's great, but that's not what she needs. Even with like in Sal and I's marriage, a great example is Sal is so focused on provision because of his experience and his personality and what he grew up with, that sometimes we've had to have conversations of like, I love the idea of retiring. I mean, I joked about it on Sunday, but it's like a legit argument we have, but I don't want to miss moments with you now. Mm-hmm. So we've even arranged our finances so that we can submit to one another in our finances. So like, I have an account that's just for, I get to plan vacations and experiences and memories, and then he has our savings account, which is different from our emergency account, which is different than he's got like 50 accounts. But like, because we had to take a step back and look at it and go, we keep ending up in these circles, and we're not trying to hear each other, we're just trying to drive our agendas. And so, I think if someone were to say to me like, well, what does it look like? I'm willing to do this, but they aren't. It's like, okay, well, let's take a step back. Let's really look at that. Let's make a plan and invite them into that plan. And then you have to trust. And that's, whenever someone would come to me and say, I want, would make a plan, they're like, well, they come in 2 months later. He's not doing his part of the plan. I didn't, here's the rule. We're going to walk this out for 6 months, and we're not going to look back. In month 5, then we can have this conversation, but you have to walk this out. And I've noticed a pattern with us, and the reason I always do 6 months is because anybody can do anything for a couple of months. If you think about it in yourself, like a workout routine or a spending routine, you're trying a better habit. We do really great for a few weeks.
Yeah, you can white knuckle it.
Yeah, and then after a minute, but true change, sustainable change seems to come around 6 to 8 months. Like that seems to be when, okay, this might be a legit thing, right? But we want the answers now. And we want the changes now. So I don't even know that I really answered the question, other than I would say I would keep going back through this series. Start with you, and then how are you showing up with them? And then like have some actual practical steps that you can take, and do that without looking back for a chunk of time. When people do that, 9 times out of 10, I think it gets healthier.
Yeah.
But it's hard work.
Yeah. I think, I wonder too, I think some people perhaps have gotten the answer, women in particular probably have gotten the answer if they've asked, what can I do with my husband? He's not engaged. We find women come to church alone for a while, and then eventually, husband come, because church can be seen as touchy-feely, and maybe there's a trend there, in masculinity and emotion and culture and stuff like that. But women go, how can I love my husband right where he's at, spiritually, emotionally, all that kind of stuff. And I'd imagine some women have gotten a we'll just submit kind of answer, or just answers that are just like minimizing of the difficulty that probably has in a, quote unquote unequally yoked kind of relationship dynamic. And so, but I think there is validity somewhere in there to go, walk with Jesus regardless of they are, and you will reflect aspects of Jesus to them. And not saying that like you need to walk with Jesus in an oppressive relationship. That's not it at all.
No.
But walk with Jesus, and they're going to see Jesus in you eventually. And that's tough because there's a lot of gray area there. But I think that is very true.
I would absolutely. I think so many things to what you just said. One, I think, I've had a woman say to me before, well, I guess I deserve to be in this kind of marriage because I married someone, and she used the unequally yoked phrase, which is where Scripture talks about, like, don't yoke yourself together with a non-believer. But if you are, and then Paul gives some instruction around that. It's like, well, if you just keep walking, but it's your walking, so it's not like, I went to church and I come home and I tell him all the things the sermon told me he did wrong.
Yep.
Or I go to church and then I nag him about not being involved, or I make passive-aggressive, manipulative statements. Women have this. Everyone has this ability. Women, I think, we excel in this ability to make, I'm really trying to choose my words wisely. We can communicate even with our breathing, like sighing, like when we're disappointed in something. And so if we're coming home, we're constantly disappointed in our husband, there's never any affirmation, there's never any encouragement. What do I want to be a part of that community for? If all that you bring home is manipulation, passive-aggressive, and that kind of stuff, or nagging me. That doesn't mean we can't have an opinion, or doesn't mean we can't say things are wrong. Man, so much of it is the posture for which we're saying it, and we're not asking questions either. Tell me what you think about this.
Yeah,
I learned this today.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts around that? And then just listening, and not judging the statement or the attendance. And I just think over time, and that's another note, is like time for us. We read a passage in the Bible, and we read it in one paragraph, and it really covered 40 years.
Yeah.
We read it in one paragraph and it covered 3 years, or an 8-day walk. And we read, this happened. It's like, no, that happened over time.
Yeah.
And we read it fast. So we thought about this miracle that's going to occur, but, time is not, there's not a box for that. Right. So some people I've seen walk it out, and just a few years later, they're in a marriage they never would have dreamed that they were in, and that's been radically transformed. Some, it's a 20, 30 year journey.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think too, Jesus doesn't say the way people are going to know you're my disciples is how theologically sound you are, or how much you read your Bible in front of your spouse, or how much all these things.
Yeah.
It's how well you love one another.
Yep.
And I think that is like when you begin to show grace to the person in a relationship, and they're like, this doesn't make sense. And you're like, it's a thing called grace. Yeah. I've recently learned about it from this guy, Jesus. They're like, that makes no sense at all.
I hope you say it just like that, by the way.
That's more a metaphorical conversation.
No, do it just like that.
But you know what I mean?
Got this guy over here who's telling me about this stuff.
No, man. I
love it.
I just think that when grace begins to show up in one side of a relationship, it won't make sense to the other person, in my opinion, because grace doesn't make sense, apart from the story of Christ. And so I think that's going to be very compelling.
Yeah, we talked about that pendulum that actually Buck's the one who brought it up, and I loved. The more I sit with that visual, the more I've watched it in my own life. Just like little moments that could have really tripped us up. Because we give each other grace. Like I think I told you about the vacation that we literally accidentally scheduled a vacation on the wrong dates, booked the cabins. We've lost the money. We've lost the vacation.
Yeah, the cabin's just sitting there right now, right?
It's actually right now in this moment we are supposed to be skiing in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And here I am, not skiing in New Mexico.
The sacrifices you make for this podcast.
We're not so getting grateful. Any money because we've lost all that money. And so, but it was a moment when we realized it happened. And I felt sick, and I wanted someone to blame. And I think he could have, because I've made mistakes in the past, like with booking things, he could have easily blamed me, but I thought he did it, but honestly, I was kind of impressed we didn't even go there. But I think it's because I've been thinking about this idea all week of like, no, just lay that down. I told a woman once, she was really frustrated with her husband. And I was like, it's like you have a hand of cards that you could play at any point. And you want to play that card so bad because you just want to like show them, and you want them to hurt, and you want them to hurt like you or feel how much you hurt. But what does it look like to not play that card? Like to actually just fold, you know? And I know that we're so scared because we take it to the extremes. Well, if I fold on that, I'll fold on everything. Like, why do we do that? Like, that's not what God tells us to do. It's case by case and moment by moment. But like really just choosing to go, okay, it was no one's fault. Like no one intended to ruin and sabotage our vacation.
Yeah.
We made a mistake. We're not really sure who did it. It doesn't really matter. But okay, now what do we do?
Yep. Yeah.
And if anybody's got like, you know, any suggestions on how to recoup your money or find a new ski cabin, let me know.
If I think of anything,
I know.
I'll let you know.
I'm like, so. Okay.
I wanna end on 2 questions.
Oh,
One,
okay.
I know that's like, but I was like, man, these
Are
are
you
both good
combining them?
questions. Not really.
Okay.
Just how does this apply to singles?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, when I think about this is, you know, one, getting to know yourself. And that's really more probably in line with like what Buck shared last week, like knowing your soul, knowing your personality, know where you're going to have a harder time submitting. I really don't think I had clarity when I got married about how hard finances were going to be in our marriage because we viewed them so differently. And I was not willing to submit with them. And so, you know, knowing that now, putting things in practice that make that easy, and then practicing it in other areas. Now, again, we talked about Sunday that, you know, that's not a verse like all women submit to all men and all men submit to all women. That's, you know, all men aren't all supposed to love all women, you know, as Christ loved the church. That's not what we're talking about here. But there is this thing, when Elena made that statement to me about, are you on his team? I recognize, like, I sometimes struggle to be on my boss's team because he might make a last minute decision and it causes me stress and anxiety at work. And there's a part of me that wants to just like, basically I'm not doing it, or basically kind of do some kind of like little punishing kind of thing. We wouldn't call it that, but that's kind of what it really is. And so like practice it now.
Somebody here is going, wait, she doesn't work at Northpoint?
No.
Yeah, she's a volunteer.
I say that often. I feel like I claim probably too often.
Yeah.
Probably, I do not work there.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, I have another job. But I, you know, or submitting to a coworker, you know, or, you know, if a coworker doesn't get something in on time and it causes me, you know, like, so there's this space in between, like, I don't want to enable you, but I can step back in this and I can help here. So showing up well, being on other people's team is a good thing to practice. But even, you know, I would say then start thinking about what kind of personality and what kind of man or woman are you interested in going on that journey with? And if you're dating someone that doesn't look like that's that direction, stop dating now.
Yeah.
Right? And so for singles, I would say like preparing yourself, knowing yourself, like genuinely knowing yourself, getting a good mentor, getting a good counselor, getting in a community group that really can see you and you can show up as your full self, and then start to refine that process and practice it. And then if you are dating or thinking of dating, making sure that your standards are already kind of set in terms of like, if I know that I'm going to be in a healthier marriage long term because he or she is already submitting to Christ, well, then start looking in that direction.
Yep. And
if it doesn't look like they're going in that direction, slow it down. If not, you know, halt it altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, the unequally yoked thing is being my years in student ministry, getting that question a lot, you know, but what about, and I'm like, okay, you know, when you think about what the win of dating is to eventually get to a point of marriage. Yeah. And, you know, that's a hard thing for a 16-year-old to stomach because marriage feels very far off and dating is just, this is fun. But, you know, if you are not aligned at your core values and belief systems, that is going to play itself out in drastic ways later on in the relationship.
Yeah, and I think we'll trick ourselves into we're aligned.
Yeah.
You know, well, you know, they were in church when they were a kid, and church is an alignment always, so it's not that that's the answer, but like we'll find ways. And I remember one couple, they were getting married, and she was like, well, you know, it'll be fine later. It'll be fine. She just kind of kept convincing herself it was going to be fine later. And every time I'd ask a question, like, how's that going to play out? Or, you know, what's his spiritual growth like? And it'll be fine later. Well, then about 3 years in, they hit a really big road. They had a really rough situation with one of their kids. And it was a lot of grief involved and a lot of struggle and transition, and it was harder than they thought. And she felt so isolated because she was going to God about it. Mm-hmm. And that was not a box he had ever checked. Like, he had never gone to God about anything. So, like, she would talk to him about, like, I just feel like God is, I'm trying to trust him. She talked about these conversations with God, and he had no context for that. So it became, now.
It's incredibly isolating.
She felt so isolated. Now, she kept walking, and he watched her faith grow through that, and he got curious. So I'm not saying that, you know, but I just think, man.
That's a painful
process to go through.
Yeah.
And, you know, would you want your kids to be going through that? Like when you think of Grayson growing up and getting married, like you don't want him to have to walk it out that way.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to be hard enough, even if it's someone that has accountability on an outside authority. But
yeah. And if you feel yourself, I always tell people, if you've put technically at the beginning of a sentence, maybe you shouldn't go with whatever comes next.
Yeah.
You know, so technically they're a Christian.
Yeah.
You know, like if that's, you know, I wouldn't look at what they might check a box on a tax form, or I don't know, you have to check what religious, whatever. But what do they do? What do they practice? You know, what do they, what consistently happens in their life?
Yeah.
Because that a lot of times shows what they value. And so, you know, do they spend time with God on a regular basis? Like some of those kind of questions. Because then you know you're going to find someone who is going to be submitting to you out of reverence for Christ. Yeah. And that's a golden person to find in my experience.
Yep, I'm with you. Yep.
So, last question. How can I be more on, just the question you ended with, how can I get more on their team, be more on their team? Anything you would add or say to? I'm sure this is a big open-ended question, but we're going to wrap up here.
I think start with ask. It goes back to kind of your question, just a variation of the question you asked a few weeks ago. Like, what's it like on the other side of me? Like asking, how can I show up for you more? Mm-hmm. You know, how can I show up better? How can I show up more fully? You know, I asked I saw that question recently. He's like, you really struggle to listen well. And I'm like, huh? No. I really actually do. I really do struggle. I mean, because I'm easily distracted and my mind is like wandering. So I've been trying that when he comes to have a conversation, I put my stuff away. Like I get off my phone for a second, right? Yeah. So I think ask, because you've said some great things. Like you talked about going on the run, and Ashley gets a minute when you get home though, because you show up as, so I think there's that texting thing about how you're coming in from the day. Mm-hmm. That's one of the gifts of that kind of communication that, we didn't always have when we were dating, but now I can be like, hey, I'm going to give you a heads up without having to have a big dramatic conversation about it. Yep. But I think, at least starting with, how can I be on your team a little more? Are there any areas you're not feeling supported? And that doesn't mean they tell you, well, I don't feel like you support my spending, or I don't feel like you support my desire to come home and check out for for hours. And it's like, well, that's a conversation, but can we have that conversation? And what does that look like? Yep.
Yeah, I think even on a positive spin on the question of, is there an area you don't feel supported? Is there an area that I can bring more value? Like I'm just big in the value thing right now. And it's just, there is any area where I can bring more value to our life dynamic. Yeah. Maybe it's kids, maybe it's intentionality with parenting, maybe it's finances, maybe it's, dating, dating, just like, I wish you would, just pursue me more. I wish those kind of things are such valid things to say. But that's been the one on my mind recently, is just how can I bring more value to the other person than they bring to me?
I love that. And I think that love language test would be, you can find those all over online. Just Google search 5 love languages. When you know that about someone, that automatically gives you like a tool, right? Yep. Like it's like, oh, okay, quality time. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Or so not true. Quality time.
So true. Well, it's like, my cup is filled up and she's like, that was nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And then you try to do the same thing and you're like, why don't you feel love?
Because I don't. Yeah. So that would be a good starting point, actually.
That's a really good practical
Like a
tool.
Simple thing. And I don't know if we can do that in the comments with the podcasty thing that we do. Like,
yeah, 5 love languages, Gary Chapman. There's tons of resources about that.
So easy. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty. You pick up on it pretty quickly too. Even just reading what the 5 different things are. So that we can link to that somewhere below in the
good, easy, practical stuff. Yep. Easy place to start with submitting to one another.
And I would say you can start that with dating as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's very applicable.
Absolutely.
To dating. Yep. So awesome. Well, cool. Well, Jen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next week
it's Jordan, right? Next week?
I think so.
Do we not say that? I don't know what
I'm
supposed to do.
I don't know.
It's Buck or Jordan or Jeremy.
We have a big plan in place. And we've been thinking about this for months. Okay. And so it's going to be a great conversation next week. But It is part 3. Jordan, Guy Star Associate Pastor, is bringing part 3. And we are getting into one of the number one things, very practically, that trips up a lot of couples. Yep. And to give some tools, some handles on what to do about it.
It's going to be good. I know really a little bit about it. Yes. It's going to be good.
It's going to be great. All right. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Bye. Bye. Why do I say bye? Like we're all getting off the phone. I don't even know what I'm
going to leave that in there. I knew as soon as you did it.